Good evening and welcome to a live stream on this Saturday, July 9th. And hope you're having a cool weekend. It's burning up hot here in Texoma, triple digits. They say there's a cold front coming through Monday, Tuesday, and it's going to drop down, and you better brace yourself for this. It's going to drop down to 98. I know there's probably not anywhere else other than in the Southwest. We would say a cool front consists of 98 degree weather, but we're so glad that you've connected with us on this Saturday evening. Again, we're starting a brand new series. It's my summer series entitled Down But Not Out. And as you look at the graphic, you see this boxer lying on the mat of a ring. And in case you don't recognize this person, that is Muhammad Ali. It is an iconic picture because it is rare that he ever was knocked down. In fact, during his illustrious career, which consisted of 61 professional fights, he was only knocked to the mat 4 times. There was in 1962 during the first round in his bout between he and Sonny Banks. Then in the 4th round of his fight against Henry Cooper in 1964, the 15th round of the 1971 fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, and then lastly what they regard as a slip, but still counted as a knockdown in 1975 when facing Chuck Webner, which, by the way, if you're a trivia buff, that bout between Muhammad Ali and Chuck Webner wound up being the inspiration for the movie Rocky. Now, other than Joe Frazier, you're probably unfamiliar with the names of these other boxers I've just mentioned. While they are relatively obscure in their notoriety, they still have that rare distinction of causing the self-proclaimed greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, to go down for a count. And so I open with this statement to you. It's not always the obvious things in life that knock a person down. In fact, on many occasions, it is the things in which a person is oblivious. That's why the New Testament is filled with warnings and advice for God's followers to stay alert, keep watch, and be on guard. For Muhammad Ali, the knockdowns in the ring for him were most often the result of the opponent's left hook. And so I ask you this question: what is that in your life that tends to knock you down or take you down? What is it what is the area of your life that you find most vulnerable? What areas or aspects of your life are you most susceptible to a takedown? Now, last weekend we gave a trivia question, and it was about a movie called Miss Congeniality. And so the answer then was Sandra Bullock. And so let's go back to Sandra Bullock, who also starred in a 2009 movie entitled The Blind Side. In case you are unfamiliar with the storyline, it was about a homeless and traumatized boy by the name of Michael Orr, who became an All-American football player and first-round NFL draft pick with the help of the caring mother, which is played by Sandra Bullock, and her family. In one of the most infamous scenes, Sandra walks out on the field and tells the coach, "Give me a minute, Bert." Coach's name was Bert. And it is a turning point in Michael's life, not just his career, but in his life. And it is when he realizes that he has the job of guarding the quarterback's blind side from the opposition's rush. The lesson is clear. We all have vulnerabilities that we must guard against. What I'm susceptible to probably differs from what you are susceptible to in life, but there are 5 common elements of these takedowns, as I refer to them, takedowns people will experience in their life. And so let me share these with you. If you have your sermon guide, feel free to fill in the blanks, use it as a teaching tool, a training tool for yourself throughout this coming week. But the first thing we realize, the commonality in the takedowns that people will encounter and experience, is that takedowns are universal. It doesn't matter if you're living in our culture or our society or in Brazil, South America, Europe, wherever you might be, there is a universality about takedowns that we experience. It happens to all of us at some time or another. Second of all, takedowns are plentiful. It's rare that it only happens once. Sometimes we're slow learners, but what we find is that takedowns in life, those things that would knock us to the mat, we experience those, more than just once. But thirdly, we find that a commonality of these takedowns that all people will experience is that they are detrimental. When you are taken down, when you are knocked down, there's a part, especially on how you respond, there's a part of that knockdown that is somewhat detrimental. It will shake your confidence. It can make you question your ability. There are aspects of a knockdown that are detrimental to your well-being and your welfare. Fourthly, they are unavailable. Takedowns are unavoidable. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are about the scripture. Doesn't matter how long you've been a follower of Christ. Doesn't matter how in your mind perfect you are or your life is perfect. Knockdowns simply are unavoidable. And the reason for that is that we have an enemy we refer to as Satan or the devil, but we have a spiritual enemy who is constantly working, as Peter said, constantly working at taking God's people out of the game, taking them down. But the last thing that we should understand about takedowns, knockdowns in life is that, again, depending on how you respond, they can be beneficial. That is, if you get up from the mat. And when you do, if you get up, you wind up growing, you wind up learning. And it's just like riding a bike. I remember as a kid having a bike donated from a family friend, and I would take it out into the front yard, and I learned how, but fell down a bunch of times. But those takedowns eventually were beneficial because it enabled me to know how to get up, how to ride, but how to get my balance. So I invite you this evening, to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8 and 9. As this weekend and the next weekend, we'll be looking at this particular passage. Paul, of course, writing to the Corinthians, states that obstacles in life are imminent, and while some are minuscule and thus insignificant, others are massive and thus problematic. A part of being amply prepared for what I will call the thumps in life is knowing where these challenges are coming from. What's the source of the thump? And then by preparing yourself, hopefully to avoid being knocked down by the blow. Hence, you find yourself able to survive those thumps. Well, Paul presents in this passage from 2 Corinthians 4, he presents 4 types of takedown thumps that we will examine in order to be aware of these areas, again, that are universal, but then ultimately how we can be prepared for them when they come. And so let's read in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where we find Paul warning us from his own experiences, warning us about these punches, these blows, these obstacles, these things which most people will be susceptible to, because what they do in our lives, as he outlines in these two verses, is that we are pressed, we are perplexed, we are hunted down, and we get knocked down. Those are the four warnings that Paul issues to the Corinthians. Now, they are a church that was pivotal in Paul's goal to evangelize the world. They were a part of a culture that was extremely paganistic. They were a very difficult society to be a part of. The idolatry that existed, the adultery that was commonplace. And so these Gentiles that were coming to Christ and accepting him as their Savior were trying to live out their faith in a very hostile culture. And so Paul is sympathetic, and yet he's writing to them and offering encouragement, but he's revealing to them these four areas that they needed to be aware of. And so let's look at these, because the first warning that Paul gives to the Corinthians is this idea that there are overt pressures in life. There are overt pressures of life. They're out there. They're in plain view, and yet those pressures are happening all over, all around our lives. And so he writes, we are, and if you are a student of the Greek, which probably most of you aren't, but if you go back to the original text, the "we are" is added by the translators in order to make it a little bit more readable for us in the English. But the idea is we are. We're not singled out, but we are. We are. The "we" is the followers of Christ. We universally, all of us, are pressed on every side by troubles. The troubles that are around us crowd in upon our lives. This idea that there is trouble all around us. Now, you may recall the very old musical entitled "The Music Man." And one of the songs that was sung is, "Oh, we've got trouble right here in River City with a capital T." And that's really what Paul was saying, is that there's trouble with a capital T all around us. And that trouble around us is positioned itself in order to pressure, to push in, to move in upon us. And so if you looked up, if you looked down, if you looked ahead, if you looked back, all around on every side, there's trouble everywhere. It pushes in from all directions to the point where you don't know where to turn or where to find relief. And we've all been in that situation at one time or another, where we're just overwhelmed by this overt pressure in life. Again, it's there, it's in plain view, but we don't seem to be able to avoid it. And so it's pressing in all directions. And it becomes so intense at times that a person will be unable to breathe. There's trouble all around, in the sense that there are what I refer to the external blows, but there is also the trouble within us, what I call the internal bothers. There's things that are pushing in on our lives, disturbing our lives, disrupting our lives from the outside. But there's also a lot of things that we store up inside that seems to bubble up and bothers us. So Paul writes later in this same letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 7:5, and he says, when he arrived in Macedonia, there was no rest for he and his traveling companions. Outside, the external, outside, trouble was on every hand and all around us. Everywhere they looked, there was things pressing in upon them. Within us, so here's where we get this external and internal, but within us, our hearts were full of dread and fear. That's where the emotions, the anxiety, the worry. And so you have this, I guess, realization, the mental, that what's around you and the pressures that are happening, but how does that churn within your heart? So what we discover is that trouble doesn't simply disappear on its own, nor do pressures tend to dissipate on their own. You have to deal with them before they deal with you. And how effective you that endeavor primarily it rests primarily on your perspective of those troubles. Do you regard them as positive, or do you regard them as negative? Do you view them as opportunities for growth, or do you look upon them as obstacles to your desires of following Christ? So Paul warns the Corinthians. He is in turn warning us. Same kind of culture in our society as the Corinthians were facing in Corinth. But he's warning them from his experiences, but warning us about the overt pressures in life. They're out there, you see them, they're obvious, but they're still pressures of life. Secondly, he warns the Corinthians about the overwhelming confusion with life. Now, I don't know about you, but there are aspects of life that you just wind up scratching your head. They don't make sense. To me, it's like, wow, really? I don't know how you respond, but there are certainly elements of your life that just are not sensible. And so it generates or creates this overwhelming confusion with life. So go back to our passage. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, here in verse 8, says we are pressed on every side, but it also says we are perplexed. Perplexed means that we look at something from a mental perspective and we cannot figure it out. We regard it, in fact, as simply a situation with no solution, no way out. We can't process it rationally, figure it out rationally. We can't create or generate a reasonable way out, and so we're overwhelmed. Now, in the Roman culture, which was prominent in Paul's days, as we find, they were like their heroes were the philosophers, people who had great minds. And so what Paul is saying to that type of culture, he's saying to them is that life is perplexing. There are things in life that you're not going to be able to figure out. You're not going to be able to rationalize. And because of that, that confusion can be overwhelming to us, and you need to be careful. There are times we've all experienced people who are struggling with the whys. Why did this happen? In John chapter 13, where Jesus had just finished washing the disciples' feet, on the backside of this great act of servanthood, Jesus had said these things. He was deeply troubled and told his disciples, "I tell you for certain that one of you will betray me." So here he was, girding up himself and taking the servant position, washing the feet of the disciples. Judas was a part of that group. And it says they were confused about what it meant, what he said. They couldn't imagine. It was unfathomable that someone in their tight-knit group would actually wind up betraying Jesus, which is what he's saying to them. Someone here will wind up betraying me. And so what they did, the result was not only were they confused, but they just wound up staring at each other. You probably have been in situations where someone asks a question and no one answers, no one responds. And so you're kind of looking around in class. Whenever that would happen, most of us would just, look down at the desk because we didn't want the professor or the teacher to call on us. But what we realize is that there are aspects of life that we are overwhelmed with, and we're confused. And you may have been found yourself at times where you're asking, why me? Why now? You're trying to reason, trying to rationalize why. Again, my terminology, the thumps and the bumps you've experienced are happening now in your life. You ever notice how your timing doesn't seem to align with God's? It's never convenient, right? When we face challenges, why now, Lord? Can't you postpone this? We try to negotiate, but Paul is warning the followers of Christ not only about the overt pressures of life, but the overwhelming confusion with life. And then he moves to the third area, the third warning to them and to us. He warns the Corinthians of the obstinate opposition in life. There's sometimes just people look at you and that you just don't get along. It's not because you've done something. It's just they look at you and you remind them of something that they're not keen about, or they know maybe you're a follower of Christ, and but there's no rhyme or reason, and so they're just obstinate. There's nothing you can do to resolve that. They're just going to be upset at you, or maybe even angry at you. So let me ask you: have you ever sung the song or said the rhyme, rain, rain, go away, come again another day? Doesn't it seem like life tends to kick you while you're down, or when it's least opportune? It's kind of like the schoolyard or the playground call for someone to pile on. Everybody would run. Somebody was slow in getting up, and you'd yell. Some other kid would yell, "Pile on!" and we'd all come running and jump into a pile on top of that to that person. By the way, you ever look in the mirror, or maybe want to look in the mirror, just to see if by chance you have a sign on your back that says "Kick me while I'm down"? So what Paul writes in here, 2 Corinthians 4, here in verse 9, he says we are hunted down. The idea, or the Greek word here, means persecuted, or to pursue, in order to persecute. And so you find that there are times, especially if you're a follower of Christ, that the world, and Jesus warned of this, the world is pursuing you. They're hunting you down. They're relentless. There's an obstinate opposition in life. And so Jesus, in John 15:20, says, look, if they persecuted me, they are going to persecute you, because a slave is not greater than his master. And that's so true in our world. The world is adamantly opposed to followers of Christ and the things of God. In Matthew 5:11, out of the Message, it says, not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. So again, we are hunted down, we are persecuted, not because of you so much as because of Christ in you. And that's just a part of living a life in a hostile environment. And so again, Paul writing to the Corinthians and in their culture, where they're trying to represent Christ just as we in our society are trying to represent Christ. He's warning us against the obstinate opposition in life. And so we need to be ready for those thumps, those blows, those bumps by the world around us who are trying to take us down. Well, lastly, Paul warns in this passage that warns the Corinthians of ongoing blows through life. That constant barrage of blows. What I have found, experienced myself, Paul has experienced, he's sharing this with the Corinthians. It's like when someone in the world realizes that there is an aspect that irritates you. They say something, they do something, and it irritates you, it disturbs you. Well, they just keep right on going. It's that constant barrage of blows. And so Paul writes in warning the Corinthians, hence again warning us, we get knocked down or cast down. And this word, interesting, only used 3 times. This Greek word only used 3 times in the whole New Testament. Obviously here, and then in Hebrews 6:1, and then in Revelation 12:10, when God is talking about how he's going to cast down Satan before our God day and night has been cast down. And so when you think of boys, especially when they're wrestling around, they're constantly trying to cast down, throw down someone to the ground. And so this word is used by God in describing how there will come a time when our enemy will be cast down, cast out of heaven. Well, this is what Paul is saying. He's saying to us, this isn't going to be like, well, we're just going to gently lay you down. If you took a baby, maybe your child, and you're holding them and they've fallen asleep, and you're going to lay them in their bed or lay them in a cradle, you're very gentle, very careful. You don't want to disturb them. You want them to just lie down. Well, when it comes to the world, they're trying to throw you down. They're trying to harm you. And so here's the reality. The world is brutal. I'm going to say it again because we don't often hear this, and we sometimes lose sight of this reality that the world is brutal. It's not going to let the world's not going to let you get up without trying to push you back down. Life isn't going to give you a chance to catch your breath or to come to your senses or to capture your balance or even for you to ascertain your next move. The world's attack on followers of Christ is like a dripping faucet that keeps whittling away at your sanity and spirituality. Well, all of this, I will readily admit, seems fairly bleak. This would be a pessimistic person's proof that life is too tough, and a person obediently following Christ will never be triumphant. But that's their point of view. That's their perspective. But Paul is merely warning us of the obstacles, the direction and types of punches that will come and be thrown at a follower of Christ. He warns us in order for us to be prepared. The outcome, please hear this, the outcome isn't determined by the problem's ability to knock you down. The outcome is determined by your resolve to get back up. Wow. If nothing else, jot that down. Let me tell you one more time, the outcome isn't determined by the problem's ability to knock you down. The outcome is determined by your resolve to get back up. I mentioned about learning how to ride my bike. My mom was inside the house. She was looking out the window. She'd see me fall, get back up, fall, get back up. And for several days, this went on until finally I mastered it. And I'll never forget, once I mastered it, I was able to ride up our driveway towards the highway that went in front of our piece of property. It was exhilarating. But if I would not have gotten back up, gotten back on that bike, I would never have mastered it. My life would have been much more limited because I couldn't go anywhere without riding that bike. And so it is with your spiritual life. Paul is warning us about these thumps so that eventually we can be prepared and be triumphant. People keep looking for a remedy to this onslaught of difficulties, yet really what they want is a reprieve from the challenges that they're continually encounter as they undertake their journey of faith. I want you to remember that not everyone makes it to the top of the mountain. And for those who have, they will tell you that the intensity increases the higher up you get in your journey. Abraham Lincoln is credited as stating, "It's not about how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up." So these are the warnings. These are the thumps, as I've identified them, that Paul is warning you and I about. Next weekend, we turn that around and we talk about not the thumps that we've encountered, but the triumph of that we can experience if we get up, and what that entails. And so we see the warning. Next weekend, the triumphs, what it takes to over these things. I hope that you'll be a part of that message. The warning Paul gives to the people in Corinth, to the followers of Christ, living in a world, living in a society that is challenging them, trying to disrupt them, destroy their faith, to take them down. Same type of tactics that we find coming against us as followers of Christ today. We can learn from those. And as I said, next weekend, hope you'll be back as we discover the ways that Paul gives to be triumphant. Thumps, next weekend, triumphs. Until then, God's grace and love be with you. Amen.